our first full episode to Pamphlets Pod. I'm going to be asking you today, we discussed a little bit about some misconceptions about the American Communist Party, a little bit about where you stand on certain issues, and just in general, who you are, what is your project, what are you doing?
Yeah, you should know maybe the context, maybe that'll help. Because nobody really cared about the Communist Party in America until Infrared, it's a multimedia collective that launched around 2020 and started gaining prominence in 2021 when I started streaming. But anyway, one of the first things Infrared, or basically what I was telling my community about in terms of what the move is for Praxis, was join the Communist Party USA and revive it. We only have one Communist Party. There's this endless cycle of sectarianism where everyone's splintering because they have a specific take on things and they have a specific idea and they have a this and a that. And it's the only way to end the cycle is just straight up just commit to one party and just make it better. And it is the Communist Party institutionally. It has formal continuity, and just starting a party based on your specific ideology is just, and when I say that, I don't mean that I agree with pan leftism. It's more actual communist politics with a capital C, meaning Marxism-Leninism. That's not an ideology. That's actually a real material form of praxis that gets institutionalized, or it's actually leaves a footprint in history. So my whole thing was look, the Communist Party USA, it's in terrible shape, but go and let's revive it and reinvigorate it, make it independent from the Democrats, and let's just have the Communist Party, straight up. No more of this democratic socialist BS and all this nonsense.
Right.
So if we're Marxists, let's just commit to it, right? So I did that. People started doing it, started gaining traction. And then sometime around the summer, I guess the feds sent this weird woman named Taryn Five. She's got a super sketchy background. She knows 5 different languages. She wrecked Workers' World, which was a Trotskyite organization. She has this super sketchy background. I think she's the daughter of some prominent media. I think CNN. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But he straight up right away tried to block this, without even knowing who I was or who we were. Look, people know that the CPUSA is super infiltrated by feds, and it has been for decades. It's not even a conspiracy theory, right? It's the FBI's, they still have people that are just there just to ensure they have control. So I just wanted to test the waters and see how true that was in practice. It's actually crazy because when my people started joining, it triggered these alarm bells, I guess, for the feds that oh shit, but this dormant, dead organization is getting a new burst of energy. We got to shut this down wherever it's coming from. And that's where a lot of the trouble for Infrared began in the tanky sphere. I obviously had always been fighting the bread tube people and all those cards or whatever. But in the quote unquote tanky sphere, we started being controversial because we were doing that. And that's when the major giant attacks on Infrared started to get launched because we were fucking with the CPUSA. So lo and behold, all these disgusting tards started sending people into the CPUSA and encouraging it just to counteract what we were doing. It was my idea to revive it, but they literally just started sending their own people to block us. They were just liberals. They had no discipline. They had no vision for reviving the Communist Party. They just had the intention to block us and stop us from getting anything off the ground because they were terrified of this new communist subculture emerging that Infrared was heralding in a lot of ways.
So sorry to butt in. Yeah. But to what degree do you feel that the CPUSA is captured by the FBI or whatever forces?
No, it is. We knew that it was theoretically, but I actually wanted to see practically, to what extent that was true. I wanted to actually test this, right? Everyone used to say it, but I wanted to actually test it just to see what wiggle room do we have to challenge that. Anyway, yeah, it's absolutely captured, 1000%. I'll get into more details about that actually as I continue the story. So the CPUSA leadership was always averse to these crazy ultra left types that were young. I wouldn't call them crazy tards, right? But they realized okay, they made a deal with the devil. They joined in an alliance hand in hand. The Democrats plus these ultra leftist Sakaists, I don't know what I would call them, the people that say read settlers or whatever, they joined hand in hand to block us. And that was a temporary alliance they made just to stop us. We had this really powerful vision of making the CPUSA an independent working class party that is mainstream, that is popular, that is the move, that is this HQ of a totally new left-wing revival where there was no more political correctness. But in contrast to the dirtbag leftists or whatever, like it was independent totally from Democrats and completely. And it had that kind of like vibe of going against this stuffy, like institutional DSA culture and all this shit. And they were trying to block this at all costs. It's super viable. Like feds knew that, right? Anyway, so they made that alliance and they eventually, the day came, I think it was like November or something. They actually wrote like an article like denouncing me. They were like, infrared is not welcome in the party. So like after that, there was this dynamic within the party where like these ultra leftists who hated infrared because they're sectarian and they're just, I'll be real, like a lot of them are mentally disabled. This is the truth. And these like feds like Terran Fiva and the institutional establishment within the CPUSA, I'll talk about that more in a sec. They consolidated control basically, and they officialized the view that if you watch infrared, if you're with infrared, if you like are a fan of me, if you like watch my streams even, you are banned from the party. So they tried to purge everyone. But before they could, I was like, all right, guys, listen, there's something called taqiyya, right? It's like from Shia Islam. Basically, means like when you're familiar. Yeah. So I told them, look, now we have to do taqiyya. Just like straight up pretend to be like a libtard and just don't be open about your views and commit to building the party practically. Do whatever you got to do to prove yourself in the party, rise the ranks, do what you got to do, stay in the party. And in 3 years, when they have their national convention, which was in 2024, or at that time, it was supposed to be in 23, actually, in 2 years, just vote for our people, straight up, kick these boomers out and take back the party. If they want to start violating their constitution in this way and getting rid of free conscience, that you can't even watch me as a streamer and they're not even willing to debate or have any open discussion about it, then don't. Just wait till their elections and take it over through that way. CPUSA has always been part of infrared's mission, right? We had this meme, it was like CPUSA 2036. We're going to make it a powerful, strong party by 2036 with millions and millions of people. That was the vision. That was the dream, right? And some crazy shit happened. They actually delayed their national convention by 1 year just because they were terrified that we were going to take it over. They literally said we're postponing it by a year so they could further consolidate control and block us out. Even then, I was like, fuck, I guess we got to wait another year. So it was supposed to be 23 and they delayed it 1 year to 24 just because they were terrified of what we were doing. So 24 comes around. This is after like Biden is in office and there's a Gaza genocide. So the 32nd National Convention, that's when we decided we were gonna, all we ever cared about was making them independent from Democrats. When we say we wanted to take it over, we wanted to make it independent of Democrats, like straight up, build up the party like as an independent thing. And the context of this Gaza genocide that was overseen by the Democrats, what we were pushing in the lead up to the 32nd National Convention was a discussion and debate about Resolution 5, a debate about the strategy of the CPUSA regarding U.S. elections. Is the priority to stop Trump or should the priority be to build the party up as an independent force? Because in practice, they had this resolution. It's like, we're going to just focus on stopping fascism. In practice, it means they're going to tail the Democrats and just go with Democrats, right? So we found ourselves, I'll just be straight up with you, the people who actually started the petition movement is what it was called, or that was later. The people who like were trying to initiate discussion about this were our people. That's who started it. But some of the tards, the Sakai camp, the USU people, I don't know if you know who they are, they also joined with us. They didn't know it was us. They had no idea who our people were. If they knew, they probably wouldn't have joined. But they saw this as like totally spontaneous and they joined in with us, right? And what we were doing was totally like legal in terms of the party's rules. We weren't like breaking the party's rules. It was just, and that was proof that people had the right to challenge this dogmatic line of just like tailing and following Democrats, right? So for the first time, we found ourselves allied with these like crazy tards who always wanted to like destroy us and call us pat socks and all this nonsense. We were on the same side as them for that whole ordeal, right? And finally, it started to get revealed who was in charge of CPUSA, these boomers, right? So a lot of people don't know this. Where the money comes from for CPUSA, it comes from People's World. So if you know what People's World is, it's this like newspaper, but it's legally the corporation that owns everything, right? And People's World is owned legally by two people. One of them is named Sam Webb. I don't know if you know who Sam Webb is. Sam Webb is the guy who like tried to liquidate CPUSA and turn it into a different party because he was like, I'm done with the communism thing. I'm just a liberal now. So Sam Webb was like the high point of the CPUSA's decline into like revisionism in the 2000s. He owns People's World along with a guy named John Bechtel, who is also just a liberal. He's not even a communist, right? And Joe Sims gets paid by these people. Like they actually functionally own the party. So the reason the party like has to tail the Democrats, even like financially, is because they get paid made by People's World that actually owns all the wealth and assets of CPUSA. It's owned by People's World. I could be wrong maybe about this. I don't know, but this is what I was told by trusted sources. Anyway, so that's what we're doing is like legacy boomer establishment. And is there Fed involvement? Probably. Taryn Fivek was there. I'm just going to straight up say she's a Fed. I couldn't see any other rational explanation for what this woman is and who she is. So they basically rigged the National Convention. They didn't even count the votes. They didn't have any discussions or tolerate any debates about their resolutions that were like centrally dictated. I covered all of this while it was going down. And if this outcome happened, which I anticipated it might like a year before, I had already made plans for, okay, if they rig their election, then we're going to just consider their party liquidated, just like what was it? In 48, they had something called they liquidated the party until the Communist Political Association or something. And they had to reconstitute it because it had been liquidated. And I was like, this is a similar situation. We just have to reconstitute the party. It's been liquidated. It literally doesn't even have formal democracy anymore. They just straight up rigged it. And it's just like functionally obsolete. It had been for a while, but now formally the liquidation had been solidified. So the contingency plan was we're just going to reconstitute it. And I liked the acronym ACP better because that shit goes hard. And also it's better for our historical situation because, to be real, like the USA is breaking apart and it's probably not going to exist like in the next 2 decades. It's probably going to like itself be reconstituted. The USA constitutionally is already dead. It's just inertia now, just like the Soviet Union under Gorbachev. And we're probably going to see a civil war or some crazy shit go down where there's just not going to be a USA anymore. So like American communism.
Let me jump in here because we're getting a little chat. I think we're now veering into just the national question of the United States, which I think you have a very unique view on. I think you're correct in your analysis that the U.S. state is now just inertia, but it's declining and it's likely it won't last much longer. In your view, what is the American nation?
Oh yeah, that's a pretty good question. So I think that the American nation is actually not finished in terms of the process by which nations come to be. I think that the American national project is unique in a lot of ways because it is forced to rediscover how nations are born in the first. No one who thinks you can just create nations based on ideas in your head, that's ridiculous. But what connection do nations actually have in terms of how they form to principles, to unifying principles? Now, a principle doesn't have to be an idea. It doesn't have to be a thought. For example, you could speak of functional principles. The story of America is a story of what?
Oh, sorry. The connection was cutting out a little bit, but carry on.
See, we get this idea that nations just come from the past. Their origins are mysterious, and there's no connection between the emergence of nations and the fundamental unifying principles of social existence or of societies and of history. Now, let me clarify what I mean. We tend to think nations are just this archaic inheritance of something that happened thousands of years ago, and we have no business kind of thinking about what active relationship we have to those premises. But what does history show us? The thing that glues together nations actually isn't just this passive accident from the past, but revolutionary circumstances. The French nation was really, truly born by the French Revolution. That's what fundamentally defined that nation.
Like to deepen the question on the American nation before we get into all of this theory, what are the conditions of the nation of the United States today and when it's founded? You mentioned a lot Sakai and this criticism of those on the left, especially, that point at the United States and say that its national history or that its national birth was one, I don't know how you would characterize it, but racist in a very broad strokes. Do you feel that is true? Do you feel that the U.S., obviously 300 years have passed, what is a positive vision for the Communist Party to offer of the American nation?
Yeah, no, I'll definitely get into that. The final thing I wanted to just say really quickly was that the former Soviet space, Russia and all the former Soviet countries, on a national level, I would argue they've been fundamentally, irreversibly defined by the October Revolution and the Soviet experience. And that actually has helped create what their national character is. But anyway, that's the thing I want to say. Now, your question, it's a very important question. I'll get right to it. I don't deny deny that the American revolutionaries were racist. I don't deny that the founding fathers were slave owners and they were racist. What I deny about is this notion that the British Empire had a historically progressive role and was just about to abolish all slavery, and that the American Revolution was actually reactionary, and it was a reaction by the slaveholders to preserve the institution of slavery. And I think it's just, first of all, it's a historical fact. Gerald Horne, this idea, and it's incorrect because the only reason the British Empire had privilege of quote unquote abolishing slavery later was because of the British Industrial Revolution. And during the U.S. Civil War, it was the British Empire that actually sided with the Confederacy against the North. So it's a completely ahistorical notion that on a fundamental level, the American Revolution was reactionary and it was just about preserving slavery. And that's what defined it.
I think that is very true. I think that the United States was and is seen often in the Western Hemisphere as the country that was the first to break away from Europe and have a national revolution. It happened before all of the other revolutions, but often in Latin America, there was a revolution of different sorts where it was not simply the separation of the colony from the homeland, but also the social revolution. And in the case of the United States, to some extent, there was a social revolution, but I think for many people, that is the distinction made there. And I believe that the continuation or the secondary revolution with Lincoln is another important part of the American project, maybe even more of an example for us today because it was historically more progressive just by virtue of happening later.
No, that's absolutely correct. The 1776 didn't accomplish a social revolution. The aftermath, entrenched interests of the landholders and the people that gained their wealth under the British system of colonialism, they maintained their power. Okay, so yeah, there were loyalists whose land was seized and expropriated. That was good, but overall, agreed. They're relative to the American Revolution. The Thermidorians already prevailed, and there were no Jacobins that prevailed. Were there Jacobin tendencies there? Were there yeomen who had these aspirations that were participating in the social revolution? Absolutely. They did not prevail. I totally agree with that. I think that and I also think that the United States, from its foundation, had to compromise with slaveholding interests in the South. But that's different from saying that the revolution was driven by those slaveholders. The actual fact is that the American revolutionaries were pretty consistently critical of slavery as an institution. And what they did in the North was that they compromised with the planter class in the South because they feared, rightfully, which was true, that the planter class had an entrenched interest, a material incentive to just side with the British Empire, which they did. That's true. But as a consequence of that compromise,
I would say there was definitely a division of the planter class because in Virginia,
there was
many of the people who were prominent slave owners or land inspectors, just the entrenched interest did end up siding against the empire, not for the ideological reasons, but for their material interest.
Yes, because the American revolutionaries to the North gave them the compromises that they wanted. That's why. And that's why there was this reactionary triumph in the aftermath of the revolution. I don't deny that at all. A lot of the structure of the United States, it is true, was this like reactionary victory for the planter class that had to be appeased. Now, do I think it had to be appeased myself? No. From the perspective of the principled American revolutionaries who had no understanding of Marxism or class dynamics or anything like that, they were bourgeois revolutionaries, that it was necessary from their perspective. So that's why it's always been an incomplete thing. And yes, you mentioned Lincoln and the U.S. Civil War. That was seen at the time as a continuation, like a continuation of the American Revolution that was unfinished at the time. And I'm not here to just idealize the American Revolution and say, oh, it was a communist revolution and it had all these communist principles. Rather, I'm pushing back against the narrative which defends the British Empire and regards this revolution as reactionary relative to the British Empire. Finally, I think the American Revolution, as you just pointed out, could vaguely and broadly be understood as the first active principle emerging of a unified American state independent from Europe. Like, foundationally, I think it can be that vague. A unified American nation and state independent from Europe that is free to choose its own future based on the principles of national self-determination and popular sovereignty, like we the people, one republic by, for, and of the people, right? That's an incredibly revolutionary and radical dream and vision, which was emerging in the context of all these various entrenched reactionary private interests. I definitely agree. But I think that the fidelity to the American national project can be seen historically from, Midwestern Marx has this cool idea of the three American revolutions, like the first one, the Civil War, then you have the Civil Rights Movement in the post-war period, right? Because the division between black and white and indigenous and others for that matter, that's a vestige of European colonialism.
Let's talk a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the Civil Rights Movement and about the United States before and after it. Because another common critique of the ACP, and you've mentioned the name several times, the specter haunting here, is and this idea of the settler state. To what extent do you agree that the United States before the Civil Rights Movement was an apartheid settler state?
Look, it was an apartheid state because there was a segregation institutionalized from Jim Crow. After the U.S. Civil War, the planter class just regrouped and became this landholder class that instituted Jim Crow. They reversed the gains of Reconstruction, and they institutionalized a type of racial antagonism between black and white poor workers as a way to, if you study the history, the whole point was dividing not just the workers, but even dividing the farmers. Because before the Jim Crow era, you had the emergence spontaneously of these populist parties, these farmers' alliances that cut across racial lines, that were demanding land reform, that were demanding checks on the landholder class. This is emerging in tandem with the growth of a multiracial industrial working class. So what the Southern Democrats did, the Southern Democratic Party was an organ of the landholding elites. They institutionalized these racial codes and racial animosity that they spread as literally just a divide and conquer tactic, right? So I don't agree with the Sakai analysis, which says that these white freeholders and white workers have this entrenched material interest to uphold Jim Crow and the system of racism, because it ignores how those were duped and were totally bamboozled into actually sacrificing and giving up their material interests, which was land reform and the bettering of their own material conditions in favor of this racial cannibalism, which didn't benefit them. Look at the Great Depression in the 1930s. Were the white quote-unquote settlers benefiting from racism? No, they weren't. The racism was a stupidity in terms of the question of them fulfilling their material interests. It was something that was working against them. And so I don't the framing which says that, all the reactionary forces in the U.S., that's actually in the people's interest, and therefore we should declare war on the people themselves. It's like, that's my issue. That's why I think it's a completely destructive narrative. It's basically saying that you're conceding the battleground of struggle to the enemy, more or less.
I understand what you mean by conceding the battleground, conceding the national identity, even the revolutionary identity of the United States, or the idea that there could be and should be a plurinational state within the United States. However, when you look at it from the outside, I think you also see the perspective of the imperial super profits flowing in from across the world into the United States. And to some extent, you can understand that these citizens of the United States were bamboozled or deceived. But to another point of view, it may seem that they're being bought off by this imperial loot to some extent. I think you mentioned that the United States is likely an unstable political formation, especially as this imperial decline sets in. So I think it's even more important to reassert this understanding of the American nation in a positive way, the American people in a positive way, and the American Party, if it is to be the ACP, in a positive way. Do you feel that the ACP is ready to lead the American people? And if not, what are the next steps?
Yeah, I want to make a quick comment on the super profit profits thing, because actually I don't entirely disagree. I just want to clarify an irony regarding that. I think the form that's taken in terms of dollar hegemony and how that's been used to bribe off the population, it was pre-2008 especially, where everyone was just taking on credit to buy homes and finance their lives. And it's this like passive consumerism where people just want the spice to flow, so to speak, to keep like buying dumb bullshit and barely working stupid bullshit jobs and just like being this mindless consumer it's almost like fentanyl. You're just kept on like consumption through passive revenues. And I think that's definitely a thing that existed, especially before 2008. And it's like that thing that is real, that is financed from the way that the U.S. sells its treasuries abroad, and how the U.S. system is financed from the surpluses that are vacuumed across the entire world, and that creates a parasitic type of economy, but that also corresponds to the degradation of the American people themselves, and the deindustrialization, the loss of productive jobs, the loss of dignified ways of life, the breakdown of norms, and the breakdown of like society itself in a lot of ways. But I would just add the caveat of an irony. Like, the thing we advocate for is a kind of like reindustrialization, return to real jobs, return to a type of industrial autarky, and everyone being sent back to the mines in a way, like with much shorter hours and better working conditions, but definitely like an emphasis on like productive labor. So there's no longer this parasitic form of existence of just leeching off of the revenues of the global surpluses. So like we've always had that position, and yet we're called fascists for that. And meanwhile, the democratic socialists like AOC and Zohran advocate for an expansion of U.S. imperialism in practice in order to just create like a passive redirection of revenues to like just give people free shit. And they don't care about the production side of things. They don't care about the question of reindustrialization. They just want to divert the super profits and distribute them differently, literally just like the chauvinistic social democrats during and after World War. So I just find that ironic that people think we're reactionary and that our patriotism, which we do have, is pro-imperialist, when the real imperialists are people like Zohran, AOC, and these kind of like democratic socialist leftists that just basically want to expand the imperial system of finance in practice. But as to your broader question, we're definitely in a post-2008 world. And hold on, give me 1 sec. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can still hear you.
Yeah. The jig is up. So people are not being able to like make a living anymore in the U.S. They can't pay rent. Everything's too expensive. They're unable to get by. Groceries are too expensive. Life as it was normally experienced, to whatever extent people were being bribed off by imperialist super profits, that whole thing is breaking down, right? Yeah. Is the ACP prepared to lead the entire country? We're only a year out. I would want to be a little more modest, but I think in principle we are. I think in spirit we are. I think that we absolutely have that ambition of being a party to lead the entire American working class and the American masses. But the problem is that it's just a matter of time. We've only existed for 1 year, and we are trying to do as much as we can to prepare and endure this crisis. We don't expect we're going to be leading the crisis ourselves. We think we don't have time for that. It's happening too fast. But we do think that if we get our shit together, we're going to weather the storm. And if we weather the storm, who's going to be remaining except the people who properly prepared for it? It's basically the mentality we have. We want to create a kind of dual power that's going to weather the storm. So that's why for us, it's not a race, it's a marathon. All we have to do is continue existing and continue organizing and having the solidarity that we do and overseeing operations that can just be compatible with a normal flow of life and control logistics and supply lines and things like that. And that's not like a exciting voluntaristic thing. We're just going to charge and be at the vanguard of this huge change that's going to happen in the U.S. because we think that change is objective. It's not subjective. It's going to happen no matter what the political ideology prevails. It's going to happen because of an objective historical contradiction at the heart of the U.S. that's coming to a head.
Let's talk a little bit about solidarity, because you mentioned the solidarity necessary, and this to me sounds like what you would call maybe a very leftist value. It's a value that speaks about the unity of all of the people. And I feel like you mentioned that there's often these attacks from the left, from the democratic socialists, maybe from other socialist parties, and you seem to perceive them as radical and ludicrous. And I think fundamentally there are two camps within the U.S. left and the people that see the ACP as reactionary. And I think one of them is the land back crowd who sees the aesthetic desire to be associated with the American nation as reactionary. And I think that the other one is, and it's the criticism that I have mostly of the ACP, is a very, at least to me, and I think to the general public, lack of clarity on your position when it comes to LGBT issues. Because the United States, this is a very popular, many people, especially on what is called the left in the United States, are gay or are trans. And I think they feel that the party is hostile to them. And I don't know if the party institutionally is, but on Twitter, I can definitely tell you they're simply representing the party or claiming to represent the party with the symbols. And they're not talking in terms of solidarity at these times. Even with the classic example of the barista, who perhaps works in services, is not traditionally or technically a proletarian. What is the responsibility of a communist party to unite and lead the people? Or are you more focused on weathering the storm, on creating dual power? I don't know if you have a compound. What do you feel?
Sorry, yeah, I definitely don't have a compound.
Terrible.
But yeah, look, I know I sound like an insane prepper, but I think that the way to weather the storm is creating like organization. And the old way of organizing, like purely from the top down, where like the tastes and whims and fancies of a leader just gets imposed on. It's not like viable. The only way to organize is to create a principle that can reproduce, even when the communication lines are cut. And even when there isn't a lot of clarity about what does the leader want or what does the leadership demand. Are we a democratic centralist organization? Yeah. But organization and how to organize, it's really just about unifying people on common principles such that people can be united and work together and pool together their resources and abilities for common goals. But
to what extent are you prepared to work with other socialist parties? For example, the PSL, Freedom Road.
We don't, the problem's not on our end. Like we're totally fine with that. It's just, I have a lot of people that come from PSL that join our party and all these other organizations, and they just straight up, it's stupid, but what they say is that when they're there and like with them, everyone's super like uptight and they have a sour face and no one's allowed to laugh or be normal. And then there's always someone that's like trying to just make it miserable for everyone by making them feel like guilty for being white or something. And it's like such a cultural difference that we have just on that. We're like, I don't know if they could like fuck with us, honestly. Like we're open. This is the thing, like regarding like people that are of sexual, we don't ask people what their sexual orientation is. We don't really care. There are people like that in our party for sure, but we're the ones that are chill. Like they're the ones that are not chill. You understand? Like we are not the ones who have an issue. They're the ones that have an issue with us because we're too chill in a sense. Like yes, we tell jokes. We're politically incorrect. And no, we don't do this thing. We're not going to pay tribute to some like other flag. We're not paying tribute to the LGBT movement.
Let's talk about
because
what should the United States have?
A new one, probably. I like the one that we have, but yeah, for sure a new one. But no, this thing of not paying tribute to the LGBT movement, it's almost like it's like a tributary system where we don't pay a tithe. They say, oh, you hate gay people and trans people. And we just don't agree with this idea that it's like a tribe. It's like this like mafia that we have to give tribute to. It's we
should gay marriage.
We don't. I think that should be a question that's not decided by me, but by the American people themselves. And that's my view.
But what's your personal opinion?
I really haven't given it that much thought, honestly. I think that I don't know, honestly. I think it's not really relevant, or I couldn't really come up with an answer because the only correct answer would be according to what society considers normal, according to what society understands as acceptable.
It is society, but a collection of individuals.
It's not something I would be interested in advocating for in a society that doesn't have it. I could probably confidently say it
does have it, however.
And I'm not really interested in reversing it. So there you go. If we didn't have it, would I crusade for it? Probably not. But we do have it, and I don't really care. Like, I'm not interested in reversing it or something.
You don't see any major drawbacks to it?
I couldn't really think of, I think the bigger issue in the US is like a total breakdown of norms between men and women. And there's this big crisis of like people not getting married or not having kids. And I think that's a bigger issue. Yeah, everyone's become like autistic and stuff. And like people just like straight up don't know how to be normal. And I don't see I feel like sexual minorities have always been a very small portion of the population. I don't think they're the problem. I think the problem is that in terms of the norms, people have become terminally online or deeply confused in terms of like how to actually find a wife or a husband or whatever and have a family and reproduce. And I think that's like a huge crisis.
A lot of times, and especially on X, and I'm frustrated by this every time I log in, because this platform is run over with men who porn, detestable women who see them porn also, yes, dating and content, discourse about all this. It just seems like on both sides.
I fucking hate, it's like this thing where there's like the incel movement and they're like, oh, are we black pilling? Are we this pilling? Are we red? All these different pills people are taking and all this fucking yip yap about something that used to not be that complicated. We're just go outside and talk to women and just do it. Don't even think about it. But
you say
it's like become, it's a crazy thing.
If you take power, would you ban dating apps?
I don't know, dude. What I think could be done at a political, or not even necessarily a political level, more a local level, if anything, in terms of like rule. Just create more like social spaces so people can actually like interact and meet each other. It'd be okay. Just create more like common social spaces. That's the problem today is that nobody can like actually go outside and meet people anymore. There's really very few places people can just go chill and interact with their, like back in the day when people were living in villages and shit, there was like common things people could do. And that's how people met. And that's gone. That's just starting to disappear, or it doesn't even exist in the first place. And I think that a government could be responsive to that by encouraging more public life in general, more of a public square type of thing.
There's the idea that the Germans had of the people's houses, which is like a library. I guess today would be like an internet cafe, which is just like a public building where people can go to chill. But in the United States, it seems like I deeply feel that the United States is not truly a nation. I know you said it was unfinished. I think it's so far away from being finished that it doesn't really have a national character. There is no.
You know what? I would say that everyone is becoming like America in that sense, because what we're really talking about is the unique alienation that was brought by the digital form of socialization. And that's like becoming universal. Like everyone around the world is becoming like autistic, and like men globally are like have anime waifus, and it's like becoming the norm globally. Japan is like the biggest victim of Americanization you can think of. And that's why I think like maybe America is a very clunky, strange, totally like unfinished nation, but that problem is becoming like a universal one. And that's why I think in a lot of ways, I feel like if America can't get its shit together and finish the fight, so to speak, in terms of becoming a nation, everyone else is cooked. Like the rest of the world is cooked. The rest of the world doesn't even know. The rest of the world doesn't know how they're going to survive this like revolution, which is what it is. This revolution in socialization and human existence that's brought about by the information age, plus all these other things that correspond to it.
I have a very different view of how the rest of the world is. I think that for many states, and unfortunately, the decline of the United States is going to result in a new era of prosperity, because the super profits that will be cut off will be retained in these nations. I think in China, they have very strong capital controls. They have very strong social controls. I think all the white girlfriends, they can go ahead. And I think the trend is to look at Chinese leadership a little bit more than American leadership. The U.S. will have reaccommodation, but I think it is a cultural revolution that is going to benefit the United States and is going to not really destroy anyone else. I think it is a necessary project to carry.
So I used to have that exact view 1-for-1, and I still think China has their shit together. And if anyone's going to survive anything, it's going to be China for sure. The decline of U.S. unipolarity is good for the world and can and should lead to prosperity. But here's the issue. Too much of the world is motivated by short-term gain. And the logic as it stands is that there will be no passive destruction of the U.S. global system. The U.S. global system, here's my prediction. It's actually crazy. If the U.S. collapses internally, Europe is literally going to come, maybe with Japan. They're going to invade the U.S. to ensure that the system keeps going, because that's how much they rely and depend upon it. Now, this is a global empire. It's not just the USA. All the elites worldwide, including a lot of the elites within China. It's just the truth. Now, Xi Jinping hates these guys and he's fighting them. They're not all gone. You name it, Russia, Iran, they're there. They are like part of this U.S. global empire, and they want to see it continue. The only way that the U.S. empire can be broken as a superstructure is a political revolution that overthrows and topples a social revolution that topples the elites on a planetary scale. I used to be white-pilled and think that, oh, just passively, everything will work itself out. But I feel like that's like a reformist delusion. I feel like, yeah, there's going to be a qualitative rupture. World revolution and the U.S. Civil War have to go hand in hand.
This empire,
the U.S. global
Japan
empire
has the capability. I don't think Europe has the capability to even handle this proxy. I don't think that the breakup of the United States will lead to restoration of invasion. I think it will lead to crisis in the first world, in what is Europe and what is Japan, in these strange parastates that do have this dependence. But I think maybe a collapse of the European Union or a collapse of Japan, I do see these as proxies of the United States ultimately. Maybe Israel, we can have a little bit of more of a discussion of maybe that they are installing leadership and are acting in a way to maintain the U.S. empire.
They are, but let me tell you something. It's not, when we talk about the USA, there are two Americas. One America is the domestic political regime that formally is based in the Constitution. We have the branches of that's the overt government we have, right? And it has to like appease domestic concerns and guarantee a minimal level of prosperity, or else out come the torches and pitchforks, you name it. Okay, then on the other hand, we have this global empire that formed in the post-war period. Now, the two are not the same. The global empire is a system that probably could survive the collapse of the USA because the system is not based in any enumerated powers of government that exist within the Constitution. It's based in the military-industrial complex, the global CIA networks of NGOs and hegemony, academia, media, institutions. You have U.S. bases around the world. There's a level of control and governance, financial, political, military, intelligence that exists that is like almost autonomous from the USA as like a political entity proper. And the reason there's this contradiction is because the empire, then what is necessary for the continuation of the empire is starting to contradict the immediate interests of U.S. domestic political governance. And that's why there will be a civil war here. There will be this like breakdown, but the forces of the U.S. global empire will, they want to reconstitute the country, get rid of the Constitution, and basically fully conform the USA as we know it to this global empire, which is newer. And that's really what the agenda has always been. It's been this, I'm not saying people think that I'm like I think the Constitution's sacred or something. It's not really that. It's just like there is an agenda to get rid of the U.S. Constitution because it is limiting the ability for the empire to control domestically at home so that it can continue globally.
I think that this is, you say it's the white pill, black pill dichotomy where it's like the more doom view. And I'll give you an even blacker pill, which is this has already happened. This happened when they killed the Kennedys. This happened when they killed Martin Luther King. This happened when they killed his brother, the Kennedy that ran to try and investigate it. They killed Malcolm X. They killed W. Newton. The Constitution does not have any political force to command the American political project. And all of these elites that you talk about, as communists, we got to say it, the one thing they care about is capital gains. It's the line going up. And what I think will lead to the U.S. collapse, what I think will lead to the Civil War, what I think will heighten these contradictions that we're already seeing is a breakdown of the profit pouring in. And I think that is coming soon. Last quarter, the United States GDP contracted. That is not something that is supposed to happen under capitalism. The projections for this quarter, they're going to come out tomorrow with the actual numbers, which then they'll continue to revise downward. Last quarter went down 0.5%. I believe that the predictions are incorrect, that there is going to be a continuing decline, and at some point the stock market is going to collapse, and a lot of the elites are going to profit immensely off this and pour their capital off into other markets so they can continue sucking blood, especially the ones who have no accommodation with the United States, who have no loyalty, like the Japanese or Israeli or Chinese elite who have their money in the U.S. stock market. And as soon as the political crisis is antagonized by this economic breakdown is when things are going to get really ugly in the United States. And if there is an invasion of the United States by Japan or by the European Union, it will be invited in by some faction that is trying to cling to some institutional power.
Yeah, I thought that was a given when I was saying that. Obviously, yeah, it's going to be like Gavin Newsom and like the Democrats that invite Europe and NATO to come and restore American democracy, for sure. I never never thought that it would be like just them. But to what you're saying, look, I also think that to your point about the like political takeover already having happened, I think that's true informally. The assassinations on the books, on the formality, we still have this like semblance of the USA and a constitution on the books. It's still bullshit in practice, but like on the books, yeah, on paper. But I think even that is what's like being called into question now. There's like a constitutional crisis with a conflict between the executive and the judicial branch. Gavin Newsom fighting with Trump about who has authority over the military. Pretty crazy stuff. And that's the type of stuff that I think is actually formally going to lead to a dissolution of the USA. But I will say, to your point about the economic change and collapse, I would argue that's actually what already happened. It happened in 2008. You can maybe argue it happened in 71. And the whole system has been propped up by sheer political will alone since then. It's not really like a consistent economic logic of capitalism that's autonomous. It's political will. They have control over the credit system, not the government per se, but this cartel of banks that has become the shadow government that controls the Federal Reserve. They keeping it going. They rigged the political system. Obama bailed them out. They made sure that at the level of government, everything would continue smoothly. By economic logic, everything should have collapsed after 2008. But the reason it's being propped up is political will. And the question is, for how much longer can that happen? A lot of people think indefinitely. I've talked to a lot of smart people who told me this can keep going forever. If there's no political change, if there's no political will, if there's no war, if there's no some revolution globally, this can keep going for a very long time. It's almost like we're entering a post-capitalist world where like the logic of markets and capital accumulation is no longer even in command. It is in principle, that's what the elites are motivated by, but in order to facilitate the continuation of capital accumulation and profits, like ironically, they've had to institute like a type of planned economy that's dominated by political willpower.
Absolutely. All economies are planned. Some are planned by bureaucrats and some are planned by market forces directing bureaucrats. But I would like to move on from this because we're getting close to the end of our time here, and I want to ask you about some current events. I would like to know your view on the Trump-Epstein scandal. Do you believe Trump is a Epstein pedophile?
Yeah, probably.
All right, sweet. Let's move on. Palestine, I think, is the biggest issue that represents an opportunity for the left, not only in the United States, but across the globe, because there is a global opposition to the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And I think for many parties on the left, it is an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, or in some cases to fail this test, as AOC did, sending, $500 million to Israel for the Iron Dome. How can the American Communist Party and communist parties around the world seize this opportunity to lead the people against this terrible crime against humanity?
On the USA, we first and foremost need to fight. We need to want a crusade against corruption, because that's what it is. It's corruption and bribery and control that's illegal, technically, by the Israel lobby and by the Zionist lobby, be they evangelical, Jewish, or something else. It doesn't matter. They control our politics, and they need to be overthrown. And I feel like the strongest way to do that is from a constitutional appeal to constitutional legitimacy, because they're literally taking over. They have taken over. And the U.S. is the #1 enabler of the Zionist genocide. If there was no U.S. supply of military weapons and aid, there would be Israel. So we're in the belly of the beast. It falls on us more than anyone else to take the most unconditional and principled stance against Zionism. Any pussyfooting, like with AOC or whatever, it's complete treachery, it's Nazism, it's fascism, it's complete betrayal of the international proletariat, because we're in the belly of the beast. We need to be especially compelled to have unconditional solidarity with forces of resistance, obviously within legal limits, because we don't want to go to jail. But the thing that I can't forgive is American leftists who are like, just condemn Hamas. And it's, who the fuck are you to say that? There's a genocide that's being funded by us, wouldn't exist without us. It's our responsibility to fight against it and fight against our culpability and fight against the Zionist control of our politics. And that's the forefront. And I think that is in the material interest of the American people, actually, because we don't have a government that's looking out for American people or the common people. It's only looking out for the global empire and for the Zionist entity.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about two last subjects before we go, which are the Nazi or imperialist Zionist alliance, where you have the far right who is directing support for the Zionist project because they see the dual benefit of boosting domestic nationalism, of expelling Jews to Israel, sending them to colonize Palestine, and then also the benefit of having a dagger in the heart of Arabia and the heart of Eurasia to twist and to hurt and to harm and to continue expanding this imperial project. How do we challenge the far right when we're trying to dominate the conversation, when we're trying to lead the people against Zionism?
Sorry, I was eating something. My bad. So the first step that we've got to take is understand how a lot of the framing of the far right, where this is like a question of the eternal Jew or something. I'm not saying that's bad because Jews are in danger of anti-Semitism, because I don't think that's true. I don't think Jews are in danger in the U.S. I don't think they're victims in the U.S. right now or in the West. I think that that promotes defeatism. It promotes obscurantism. And oftentimes the loudest proponents of this view don't actually have any solidarity with the resistance. So it's a false anti-Zionism. And the second thing I'd say is that the other far, which is like the one that's in power, Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, BAP, Curtis Yarvin. I don't know if you're familiar with these names. They're like a Zionist far that are tied to international networks with the Jacobit, whatever, what was his name? The revisionist Zionist. Jabotinsky, yeah. The revisionist Zionist school, which has always been the driving force of Israeli state principle. They have this, they're the ones in power. They actually are the biggest threat because they have a really sinister interpretation of the quote unquote, the Jewish question, which has been universalized in a way to where it's like, it is this kind of extremely anti-human idea that like from the Zionist angle, from the revisionists, they're like, okay, Jews have always been victims, so we have to create like a fascist state where might is right, and we're just going to basically destroy and crush the weaker and inferior races and yeah. But that's also being like adopted by the far in the West as well. It's just like extremely anti-human mutation of Herzl's original like libtard enlightenment thing, and it's nihilistic at the core. It's tied to Silicon Valley's like transhumanist agenda. It's tied to fundamentally like a literal anti-human agenda, actually, which wants to completely destroy any semblance of morality and shared values, or even a common human existence in the first place. So it's, think of the polar opposite of Xi Jinping's idea of a common prosperity of humanity, part of Xi Jinping thought, right? This is like the total polar opposite of it, right? And it's this really wicked notion. You'll see a lot of these people, they call themselves race realists, trying to combine modern science, or postmodern science, I like to call it, with a return to the scientific racism. And they're doing this through this this gene bullshit. I don't know if you want to get into Lysenko. We don't have to.
No, please don't talk about it. Please don't talk about it.
No problem. Some people are not prepared for the truth, and that's okay. But
I have seen.
Let me just be longer. You can't show me a gene. There's no such thing. Come on. But anyway, look, all memes aside, but I am serious about it actually. But all that aside, they have this. They're trying to say that haplogroups are races. They're trying to say that all this is written like the revisionist Zionism, though, or at least it's like really connected to it. Because the revisionist Zionists, they see Jews as a race, not just as a nation. They see it as like a DNA, blood, not just blood. It's like this new twist on rationalistic science that it's rooted in. It's tied to the Silicon Valley agenda, which is basically saying, okay, we looked at the science says that black people are subhuman and that all the brains are different and whatever. And we need to create a new techno-feudal order where everyone is basically like a serf and a slave, and only the genetically superior will enjoy privileges and eventually ascend to the next stage, which is merging with machines. They have these crazy fucking ideas. It sounds crazy, but do your research, and this is what these people believe. And it's super dangerous, actually. Super. I don't like to fearmonger because I think they're going to fail, but that is what's in power. That's what's been in power. Mark Andreessen and all these fucking creeps from Silicon Valley, like it's all connected. Does that sound too crazy?
Well, a little bit, but I think it's just a question of what language we choose to use. I think you are correct when you say it is fundamentally anti-human, and there is a lot of demonic influence in what they're saying. They're truly possessed by forces that are not human, that are evils, that are fueled by their desire that is out of control, and into the symbolism here. But it brings me back to what I did talk with Vijay about, which is the responsibility of the left and the vision of the global south left, or at least of the Chinese project of BRICS, to build up this common prosperity. And this also has a spiritual element of common decency, common morality, where in this postmodern world, we find some commonality because we all know that some things are demonic, some things are wrong. What Trump did with Epstein is demonic. It is wrong. What the Nazis and their demonic ideas about race and about IQ that exist to divide humans and to create a hell on earth is fundamentally wrong. And we do need, and we have the responsibility as the people who are trying to lead, to purge the seed, to expel the seed, to crush the seed, and to name the seed. And I think it is very difficult to dispel some of these myths online because there's such an echo chamber and there's such a control of this techno-feudal postmodern world we live in. They have seized with an iron grip. Like Elon Musk, he's tweeting he's getting 60 million views. It's not because he's an especially insightful guy. It's because he's rich, he's famous, and he owns the platform. And the challenge is then to build something outside of that, or even within it, try to challenge it. And I don't know where we go from here. How do we organize the masses? How do we organize the great masses of humanity that do despise these demonic attitudes, that do despise these demonic activities? How do we unify them? How do we break all this programming? And that's what I'm going to ask you, because you're supposed to give the answer here. So good luck.
So look, it's always going to come down to two things if you're asking me for the solution to what's going on, right? One, you got to reassert the question of what sovereignty is. What does it mean to be truly sovereign? Popular sovereignty, okay? This would be sovereignty over tech in general, right? First of all, there needs to be sovereignty in terms of organizations being able to control their own tech, being able to even control their own infrastructure and hardware. That begins with organization. Organization's everything. And that leads me to the second thing, right? In addition to sovereignty, we need to raise the property question. That's what communism is all about. If you read back to the earliest writings of Marx, it's all about the property question, right? And the property question, a lot of people personalize it, and that's the problem. They say, oh, is this a question of what if I own my toothbrush and who should use my... No, property is not personal, okay? Property is an institution. And the problem is we don't have frameworks in which we can question property as an institution without personalizing it and making ridiculous analogies of, okay, so you're going to take my shit and whatever. It's like we need a new property question. We need a new communism that says, what does it mean to actually own something? And economic ownership, should that be off limits from the question of political solutions, from the question of the future of society itself? And my answer is no. We need to actually raise that question to the fore once again. And I don't think we should turn. I agree. Look, there's a lot of Silicon Valley guys that would say, look, the government, it's outdated. It's a big bureaucracy. You give them control of all the tech, they're going to shift it up. Yeah, actually, I agree with that. I don't want to give the current rotten bureaucracies control of tech. I want a new form of popular sovereignty, a new form of political power to be created. Just like Soviet power was created in 1917, it was totally new. And that's what we need. One that's updated and adapted to the era that we live in, that can exercise control, sovereignty, and true ownership over the infrastructure, the common infrastructure, especially the infrastructure for communication and the flow of information. So that's my answer. I don't know if it's too vague, but my answer is basically the ACP. It's always going to be my answer, our party.
I think that's a better answer than most people have. Let's move on to what's going to be our second to last question. Just a quick yes, no. Is mega communism dead? You told me it was always a meme, or I don't know. Give a short response to this, please.
No, it's not dead. It's actually more alive than ever. It's more relevant than ever because this is debating this moment.
How do you feel about the expert analysts who are saying that mega Maoism is truly the ideological formation that is prepared to challenge for the leadership of MAGA, that MAGA communism does not have the mass line, that MAGA communism is focused more on the cult of personality around Trump, whereas mega Maoism is organic. It's coming from the people. It desires to challenge for control of the MAGA movement. It has at least one proponent recently in Marjorie Taylor Greene, who launched her campaign to seize a little bit of power back from the elites, to at least demonstrate who is on what side with her vote for releasing the Epstein files, with her vote against sending more military spending money to Israel. Do you think mega communism is perhaps a little bit less suited than mega Maoism for challenging for the hearts of the people and of the ideal?
I don't think
America great again. Which
there's a distinction. Yeah, I can answer both those. I don't think there was ever a distinction. Like, MAGA Maoism was just a way for journalists to say, oh yeah, the MAGA communists were right, but instead of communism, we're going to say Maoism because we don't want to pay them their tithe and give them credit for anticipating that. Yeah, like MAGA, I would say the only difference is that MAGA communism has the element of intention to actually bring Marxism to the MAGA masses and not just have it be a spontaneous, wait for the spontaneous moment. We always were trying to be here for this moment. We were thwarted, honestly, by leftists. They did sabotage us, frankly, by we had to spend too much time fighting them back that took away from our ability on the masses in time enough to make communism dominant as a tendency. But I'm patient, and I think it's already starting to happen. People are open-minded. MAGA people are more open-minded than ever to new ideas. But I don't see a distinction between the two. And then the second thing I would say is that when was America great? I think that the question, America was great when it had a clear understanding of what popular sovereignty was, which was in its revolutionary moment. Now, did it ever institutionalize itself in any kind of way? No, it didn't. But that moment where, that's my interpretation of it, make America great again is roll the dice again. Okay, it's about rediscovering popular sovereignty, because the form of popular sovereignty that we have, which is in the institutions, and it's dead. Okay, so there's this new one that's cybernetic, that's forming based on the information age, and it's relitigating the question of national popular sovereignty. The whole reason Trump won in 2016, 2015, mainly, or at least it was a big shadow that was following his campaign ever, was the fucking internet shit. They, in the cards, admitted it with emphasis they placed on Cambridge Analytica and Facebook memes and stuff, and the Russian interference hoax. So make America great again is not about, to me, it's not necessarily about restore a previous state of affairs. It's more like, let's now relitigate the question of the popular sovereignty that underlies the American state, because the one that we have now is false, inadequate, or dead.
So, to paraphrase, it may mean make America greater still, or go through another revolutionary moment, a process of transformation that could make America greater, to just heighten the nation, to elevate the nation, to progress the nation, if you will.
It's not, the point is, it's not about this like thing of, oh, we want to just improve them. That's superfluous. Everyone wants to improve their country. It's more go through this revolutionary process so that we can actually be a nation, a sovereign nation. Now, is that nation greater than the one that exists? The problem is that we're facing the question of, do we even have popular sovereignty? Is this nation great or worse, even ours? Does it even belong to the people anymore? Or has it ever belonged to the people institutionally? So that's a more important question to me. Does America need to be greater than it is now? Is less of an important question to me than what is America? Are we being honest about what we are as a nation? Who are we? How do we discover what we are?
What is America? Who are we? Who is an American? Another position where the Communist Party differs from most left-wing parties on this is their view of immigration. Sometimes the position is to the negation of open borders, which is a very popular line to just say and be like, oh, no country has open borders. We're not calling for open borders. But I would like to ask you to offer a positive vision of what are the pathways to become an American. Is someone who is sweating and bleeding in the fields to feed Americans an American if they root here without papers illegally? What does it mean to be an American?
I don't support the mass deportation of the migrant laborers. That's for sure. I think an American is someone who is loyal to this land, to this country, and to this form of collective existence. I think an American is someone who, in the midst of a revolutionary circumstance, would stay here and for the revolutionary forces of their country and be loyal to it to that extent. And some migrants wouldn't be. Some migrants that came here recently from the other side of the world, for example, to be engineers, if there was shit that went down, they'd probably go back home where it's safe. I would say those people aren't real Americans. So I don't have an idea of American that's based on blood or even necessarily like your culture. It's more like even the Mongol tribes, they would let people in if you ride or die with them. You wanted a tribe, then fight in battle with us. So I have more of a dynamic view of how to be part of the nation, how to be initiated into a nation. It's neither just culture or ethnicity, meaning blood. It's something more fundamental, the common principle. But I would say that on the question of mass immigration, I'm not against flows of population between countries. What I'm against is the anarchy where this is all decided individually, even though at an aggregate collective scale, that's where the impact happens. I believe in a centrally planned economy where population flows are planned on a rational basis, not left to the anarchy of markets.
I think, as we've talked about before, to a certain extent, the U.S. economy is planned and has been planned for many years. Especially poignant example of this is during World War with the FIDL program. Many Mexicans were invited across the border, enabled in order to fight for the United States or to participate in the war production of the United States during World War II, to effectively against fascism, against Nazi Germany, against Imperial Japan. And this was a project that involved, at the end of it, deporting all of these people, or not all of them, but certainly millions and millions of people who came across the border and fought and participated in the war production. In many cases, joined the U.S. Army and literally fought against the forces of reaction in the world. And what I would like to tie this into a follow-up question is, what is the unique... People always talk about the American exceptionalism in slightly negative terms, but I want to expand the definition of American to look at the whole American continent, to look from Greenland down to, and to look at this and say, this continent in history is outside of the old world. It is outside of the history of the old world. It does exist in some state as an exception. And what view does the American Communist Party have of the integration of America as a continent, of potential allies for the anti-demonic forces that exist in the United States? Some of these forces have seized power already in Latin America and are speaking of common decency and are working towards common decency. And to some extent, they're revisionist or social democratic, but they are condemning the Israeli genocide. They are organizing legal action in the United States against this. Like my country, Bolivia, is governed by a man, Luis, who calls himself a Marxist and a Leninist, and who has spoken in clear terms about these things. What Pan-American project is the unique opportunity of the Communist Party of the United States to lead? Or do you feel that it is strictly along national lines, the struggle must be waged first?
I regard all these sovereign, oftentimes revolutionary states across Latin America as legitimate American state revolutionary traditions. What the ACP's view is basically that the goal needs to be the total elimination and expulsion of European colonialism from North America, meaning Canada, probably Greenland as well. Now, whether that happens along the lines of Trump's plans or we agree with that is a different question. Probably not, right? But overall, we do include Canada on the map, and we consider it part of one American state. But why we don't include Mexico and other states in our part is because they have their own revolutionary sovereign traditions. So us making claims on Mexico would be chauvinistic. It'd be us saying that we're going to force Mexico to unite with us. We don't want to force Mexico to do anything. We want to take over here and then negotiate dialogue and integration with Mexico on a free and equal basis, and hopefully form a union, but one that is between equals and not one just taking the other. Now, do we consider Canada an equal state tradition? No, we don't, because it doesn't even have its own independent state tradition. It's literally still part of the British Commonwealth. They never had their own revolution. Mexico did. These other states often did. But yeah, the long-term goal is forming like a Soviet Union in America, the Americas. But the only way that happens is on an equal basis. We can't just be laying claim to other territories and saying they belong to us. There has to be a way for it to be agreed upon that it truly integrates both into a common national framework.
I think that is true, and I think that I'm going to leapfrog from that comment about the unequal treaty of Guadalupe that was signed between Mexico and the United States, and how this is still causing contradictions within the United States today, especially in the borderlands, in the states that were Mexican territory, that were ceded to the United States, that have existed legally as the United States for many years, but have a unique national character because they are, to some extent, populated still by a different cultural group, which has ties not to a motherland far off in Europe, but to a sovereign state with a national character and a, as you say, a revolutionary socialist tradition that is much more defined in the United States. And I think that's a lot of where the nationalism for Mexicans in the United States, like the ICE protest, a lot of the woke right was going crazy and complaining about them waving these flags because they're upset.
Yeah, if I could say real quick,
red coats are coming into their communities and grabbing their people and forcing them across state lines.
If I could say quickly,
I'll let you interrupt. Go ahead.
If we took power, very quickly we'd want to just form a union state with Mexico, like ASAP. So we would want to create a framework for joint sovereignty, basically. That would be my answer, I guess, to the question of like Mexico's old territories. We want a common framework. We want common zones. We want joint sovereignty, joint frameworks where there are exceptions for population flow in regions with more cultural similarity in Mexico. Would there be massive disruptions? Let's say we just took 200,000 Americans and put them some random place in southern Mexico. That would cause a lot of problems. Even Mexico City right now, like people are getting tired of Americans moving there, right? Because they're causing a lot of disruption. And this isn't about dehumanizing people. It's just about understanding these things have to be planned rationally and they have to make sense. I think it makes total sense for Mexico to be especially more integrated with those lands population-wise. But yeah, we'd want to just form a union state with Mexico as soon as we took power. That would be ideal. Would Mexico have to undergo a revolution of its own for that to be possible? To get rid of the capitalist class that exists there? I don't know. It's up to the Mexican people. But we would definitely like to negotiate bilateral frameworks for sure that are advantageous for the unique circumstances of Mexican Americans and Mexico.
Are there any other situations, do you feel, where there is complication of the national question like this in the United States?
There's a lot of complications in general.
Major implications that would result in the necessity of establishing some sort of special autonomous region, for instance, the Black Belt, or...
No, I don't agree with the idea that Black people are a separate nation. I think they're a unique part of the American nation, which is one nation. And I think that the division of Black and white is a vestige of a immature national project. I used to be sympathetic to that view, but I realized how integrated the Black and white populations truly are and how unfeasible it would be to divide them by nation. So I don't agree with balkanization of the USA on racial lines at all. I agree with a new framework of unity of one American nation. But Hawaii, for example, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we occupy and control Hawaii. You ask me.
Puerto Rico.
Definitely independence for Puerto Rico, just like day one. If we took power, this is a crazy hypothetical, but yeah, we don't believe in any territories or colonies. Totally reject that.
I really appreciate the conversation. It gave me a lot of insight into how you think about politics, about how you think about geopolitics, and I think it will offer a new view to a lot of our listeners about who the American Communist Party is and what they stand for. So I want to thank you for your time, your patience, and your eloquence.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It was a great interview.
All right, buddy. Take it easy, and I'll see you on